Jonathan had always been a car guy. From the time he was a little boy, he'd spend hours flipping through magazines filled with glossy pictures of sleek sports cars and vintage classics. He wasn't just fascinated by their speed or design. It was the stories behind them that truly captivated him. Every car, no matter how old or new, carried a piece of history within its frame. Some were born on racetracks, others on assembly lines during moments of innovation, but all of them told tales of adventure, craftsmanship, and passion. As Jonathan grew older, his love for cars only deepened. By the time he turned 30, he had saved enough money to buy himself a project, a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. It wasn't much when he first saw it. The once vibrant red paint was faded, the chrome accents were dull, and rust had begun creeping along the edges of the bodywork. To most people, it looked like junk, something better left in a scrapyard. But not to Jonathan. To him, it was a diamond in the rough, waiting for someone with vision to bring it back to life. For 3 long years, Jonathan poured his heart, soul, and every spare penny into restoring the Mustang. Weekends were spent, elbow-deep in grease, tinkering under the hood or sanding down panels until they gleamed. Nights were reserved for researching parts online, hunting down rare components that would make the car authentic to its era. Slowly but surely, the Mustang transformed from a forgotten relic into a masterpiece. The engine roared with power. The interior smelled of fresh leather, and the paint sparkled so brightly that neighbors often stopped to admire it when Jonathan took it out for a spin. But owning such a beautiful car came with challenges. Living in a small apartment meant Jonathan couldn't keep the Mustang parked outside overnight. It needed shelter to protect its pristine condition. So when he finally saved enough for a down payment on a house, finding one in a community where he could proudly display his prized possession became a top priority. That's how he ended up at Willow Creek Estates, an upscale gated neighborhood known for its manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and strict homeowners association (HOA) rules. At first glance, Willow Creek seemed perfect. The houses were modern, yet charming, the roads wide and smooth, and the sense of security unmatched. When Jonathan attended the orientation meeting before moving in, the HOA representatives assured him that while there were guidelines about property upkeep and aesthetics, common sense prevailed. They encouraged residents to personalize their homes while maintaining harmony within the community. Satisfied, Jonathan signed the paperwork and moved in, parking his Mustang proudly in the driveway for everyone to see. For months, things went smoothly. Neighbors passing by would stop to chat, complimenting the Mustang and asking questions about its restoration. Kids riding bikes waved enthusiastically whenever they saw Jonathan washing or waxing the car. Even Karen Thompson, the infamous HOA Karen who everyone whispered about, gave him a polite nod during her daily walks around the block. Life felt good. The Mustang wasn't just a car anymore. It was a conversation starter, a symbol of hard work, and a source of pride. Little did Jonathan know, however, that trouble was lurking beneath the surface. In a place as meticulously controlled as Willow Creek, appearances mattered more than anything else. And to some, a shiny vintage car sitting in a driveway wasn't a thing of beauty. It was a potential violation of the rules. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, eyes were already watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. For now, though, the Mustang remained untouched, gleaming under the sun as if nothing could ever tarnish its glory. Karen Thompson was the kind of person who thrived on order. Her life revolved around rules, schedules, and making sure everything in her world stayed exactly as it should be. To her, Willow Creek Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a reflection of perfection. A place where every blade of grass was trimmed to the same height. Every mailbox stood perfectly aligned, and no one dared disrupt the harmony she worked so hard to maintain. Karen took immense pride in being the unofficial enforcer of these ideals. She carried a clipboard everywhere she went, jotting down notes about minor infractions like garden gnomes that were too whimsical or garage doors left open for more than 5 minutes. Some might call her obsessive, others simply avoided crossing her path. Every morning at precisely 8:30 a.m., rain or shine, Karen embarked on her daily inspection walk. Armed with her clipboard, a pen, and an air of authority, She strolled through the streets of Willow Creek, scrutinizing each property with the precision of a detective searching for clues. Nothing escaped her watchful eye, not even the tiniest detail. If someone's holiday decorations lingered past January 15th, Karen noticed. If a neighbor's dog left paw prints on the sidewalk, Karen documented it. And if a car parked in a driveway looked out of place, well, that was practically a crime in Karen's book. It was during one of these routine patrols that Karen first laid eyes on Jonathan's Mustang. At first glance, it didn't register as anything unusual. The car sat quietly in his driveway, its gleaming red paint catching the sunlight like a jewel. But as Karen approached, her pace slowed. Something about the vehicle gnawed at her. It wasn't new. That much was obvious. In fact, it looked decades old, its design harking back to an era long before modern SUVs and sedans dominated driveways. To Karen, this wasn't nostalgia, it was a problem. Her mind immediately flipped to the HOA handbook tucked neatly inside her purse. Specifically, Rule 12B. No vehicles older than 10 years may remain visible overnight. The rule existed to preserve the neighborhood's polished image, ensuring only sleek contemporary cars grace the driveways of Willow Creek. Karen's lips pursed into a thin line as she read over the clause again in her head. This Mustang clearly violated the policy. How dare Jonathan flaunt such an eyesore in plain sight? Didn't he know the standards they all agreed to uphold when they moved here? Fuming, Karen circled the car like a hawk sizing up its prey. She noted every detail, the chrome accents, the vintage license plate, the subtle curves of the bodywork, all glaring reminders of what she considered a blatant disregard for the rules. As far as Karen was concerned, Jonathan wasn't just breaking protocol, he was challenging her authority. And Karen did not tolerate challenges. That evening, after returning home and brewing herself a cup of chamomile tea, Karen sat down at her kitchen table to draft a formal complaint. With meticulous care, she typed out a letter addressed to the HOA board, attaching several photos she'd taken earlier that day. Each image highlighted a different angle of the Mustang, accompanied by captions pointing out its age and supposed disruptive presence in the community. Karen's tone was firm but professional, though anyone reading between the lines could sense her simmering frustration. She concluded the letter by demanding immediate action, urging the board to enforce the rules and protect the integrity of Willow Creek. The next morning, Karen delivered the complaint personally, slipping the envelope into the HOA president's mailbox with a satisfied smirk. She felt confident that justice would prevail. After all, the rules were clear, and Karen had never lost a battle against a rule breaker. What she didn't anticipate, however, was the storm she was about to unleash. Unbeknownst to Karen, Jonathan wasn't the type to roll over without a fight. He had spent years restoring that Mustang, pouring his heart and soul into every inch of it. To him, the car wasn't just a possession, it was a testament to perseverance, creativity, and passion. When the certified letter from the HOA arrived, a few days later, Jonathan's initial shock quickly gave way to determination. He knew the Mustang was special, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him. As tensions began to rise, Karen doubled down on her efforts. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes on Jonathan's windshield whenever she passed by. "Lovely antique," one read, the word antique underlined twice for emphasis. Another note read, "Hope you're enjoying your trip down memory lane." These snide remarks only fueled Jonathan's resolve. Instead of caving to pressure, he decided to dig deeper, researching local laws and consulting experts who specialized in historic vehicles. Little did Karen realize her crusade against the Mustang was about to backfire in ways she couldn't have imagined. For now, though, Karen remained oblivious to the brewing conflict. She continued her patrols, convinced that her actions were justified and that the HOA would side with her. After all, rules were rules, and Karen lived by them. What she failed to recognize was that sometimes rules aren't enough to win a battle, especially when the opponent has passion, preparation, and principle on their side. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as Jonathan was leaving for work. He found it tucked neatly into the mailbox, its official appearance immediately catching his attention. The envelope bore the logo of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, along with a bold red stamp that read "Urgent." His heart sank as he tore it open and began reading. The tone was formal, almost robotic, but the message was clear. Jonathan had 48 hours to remove his beloved Mustang from public view or face escalating consequences, including fines and potential towing. At first, Jonathan felt a mix of disbelief and anger. How could something so beautiful, something he'd worked so hard to restore, be considered a violation? The Mustang wasn't an eyesore, it was a masterpiece. But as he reread the letter, his emotions shifted from frustration to determination. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for what he believed in. He knew the Mustang deserved better than to be hidden away like some shameful secret. And if Karen and the HOA thought they could bully him into compliance, they were sorely mistaken. Jonathan decided to fight back, not with hostility but with strategy. That evening, after returning home and parking the Mustang safely in the driveway, he sat down at his computer and began researching. He started by reviewing the HOA handbook, carefully analyzing Rule 12B, the one Karen had cited in her complaint. While the rule did prohibit vehicles older than 10 years from being visible overnight, Jonathan noticed something important. There was no specific mention of historic or classic cars. This omission gave him hope. Perhaps the rule hadn't been written with vehicles like his in mind. Determined to find answers, Jonathan turned his attention to state laws. After hours of searching online legal databases and forums dedicated to car enthusiasts, he stumbled upon a goldmine of information. Many states, including his own, had statutes designed to protect historic vehicles. These laws recognized classics as cultural artifacts, exempting them from certain restrictions that applied to ordinary cars. Some even granted special parking privileges to owners who registered their vehicles as historic. It was a revelation that filled Jonathan with renewed confidence. If he could prove the Mustang qualified as a historic vehicle, he might have a strong case against the HOA's demands. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. Jonathan knew he needed evidence to support his argument. Over the next few days, he gathered every scrap of documentation related to the Mustang's restoration. Receipts for parts, invoices from mechanics, letters of authenticity from automotive experts. All of it went into a neatly organized folder. He also reached out to a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, scheduling a consultation to discuss his options. By the time he met with the lawyer, Jonathan felt prepared, armed with facts and figures that painted the Mustang not as a nuisance, but as a cherished piece of history. Meanwhile, Karen remained oblivious to Jonathan's efforts. Emboldened by the lack of immediate response to her complaint, she grew bolder in her attempts to pressure him. She began leaving passive-aggressive notes on his windshield whenever she passed by during her daily walks. One note read, "Still here, huh? Hope you're ready for the fine ferry." Another simply said, "Rules are rules," followed by a smiley face that somehow managed to look smug. Each note infuriated Jonathan, but instead of responding directly, he used them as fuel to strengthen his resolve. Every jab from Karen only reminded him why he couldn't afford to give in. As the deadline approached, Jonathan drafted a formal response to the HOA board. With guidance from his attorney, he crafted a letter that was both respectful and firm. In it, he outlined the legal protections afforded to historic vehicles, citing specific statutes and providing copies of his documentation as proof. He emphasized how the Mustang contributed positively to the community's aesthetic appeal, drawing admiration from neighbors rather than complaints. Finally, he concluded by expressing his willingness to cooperate within reason, but made it clear that he would not compromise the integrity of his prized possession. On the morning of the deadline, Jonathan hand-delivered his response to the HOA office. As he walked away, he felt a sense of pride mixed with apprehension. He had done everything he could to defend the Mustang, but the outcome was still uncertain. Would the board see reason, or would they side with Karen and enforce the rule regardless? Karen, meanwhile, remained convinced that victory was inevitable. At the next HOA meeting, she confidently presented her case, reiterating her belief that the Mustang violated the neighborhood's standards. She spoke passionately, painting Jonathan as someone who flaunted the rules and disrupted the harmony of Willow Creek. But as she glanced around the room, she noticed something unsettling. Several board members exchanged skeptical glances while others scribbled notes with furrowed brows. It was clear that Jonathan's arguments had struck a chord. When it came time for discussion, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. One board member raised concerns about the legality of enforcing Rule 12B against a vehicle classified as historic. Another pointed out the positive feedback the Mustang had received from residents. Even those initially inclined to agree with, Karen began to waver, questioning whether removing the car truly served the best interests of the community. For the first time, Karen found herself on the defensive, struggling to justify her stance without sounding unreasonable. Despite the growing opposition, Karen refused to back down. She insisted that allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for other residents to challenge the rules. Her stubbornness only alienated her further, turning what should have been a straightforward discussion into a heated debate. Eventually, the board agreed to table the issue temporarily, recommending mediation as a way to reach a resolution. For Jonathan, the decision to pursue mediation felt like a small but significant win. He knew the battle wasn't over, but he also knew he had momentum on his side. The Mustang had become more than just a car. It was a symbol of resilience, creativity, and the power of standing up for what you believe in. As he stood in his driveway that evening, admiring the way the setting sun illuminated the car's polished surface, Jonathan allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. No matter what happened next, he had fought for the Mustang with everything he had. And sometimes that was all that mattered. Karen was not the type of person who gave up easily. If anything, resistance only made her dig her heels in deeper. When she realized that Jonathan wasn't backing down and had even gone so far as to present a legal argument to the HOA board, her frustration boiled over into outright determination. She saw this as a personal challenge, a test of her authority and influence within Willow Creek Estates. To Karen, rules were sacred, and anyone who dared question them was essentially questioning her entire way of life. The Mustang couldn't just stay parked in Jonathan's driveway. It had to go. And if Jonathan wouldn't comply willingly, then Karen would find other ways to make sure he did. Her next move came late one Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. Jonathan had spent the afternoon tinkering with the Mustang, giving it a fresh coat of wax to keep its paint gleaming. He'd parked it proudly in his driveway, admiring how the fading sunlight reflected off its surface before heading inside to relax. Unbeknownst to him, Karen had been watching from across the street. Armed with her phone, she snapped several photos of the car, zooming in on details like the vintage license plate and slightly worn tires. To Karen, these imperfections were proof that the Mustang didn't belong in their pristine neighborhood. But instead of simply filing another complaint, she decided to escalate matters dramatically. That night, Karen picked up the phone and dialed 911. Her voice trembled with urgency as she reported an abandoned vehicle sitting in Jonathan's driveway. "It's been there for days," she insisted, exaggerating wildly. "No one seems to be taking care of it, and it's starting to, look like trash." She described the car in vague terms, careful not to mention its classic status or the fact that it clearly belonged to someone living in the community. By the time she hung up, she felt a surge of satisfaction. Surely the police would tow the car away, and Jonathan would learn his lesson once and for all. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up in front of Jonathan's house. The flashing lights startled him, and he rushed outside to see what was happening. Two officers stepped out of the vehicle, their expressions neutral but professional. One of them approached Jonathan, while the other examined the Mustang. "Sir, we received a call about an abandoned vehicle here," the officer said, gesturing toward the car. "Is this yours?" Jonathan blinked, momentarily confused. "Abandoned? No, this is my car," he replied, pointing to the license plate and registration sticker visible through the windshield. "I've owned it for years. It's definitely not abandoned." The officer nodded and asked to see proof of ownership. Jonathan quickly retrieved his registration documents and insurance papers, handing them over without hesitation. As the officer reviewed the paperwork, the second officer inspected the Mustang more closely, noting its immaculate condition and lack of any signs of neglect. After a few minutes, they exchanged glances and returned to Jonathan. "Everything checks out," the first officer said. "This car is registered to you, and it's clearly being maintained. We'll let the caller know there's no issue. Here." Relieved but irritated, Jonathan thanked the officers and watched as they drove away. He didn't need to guess who had made the false report. It was obvious. Karen's tactics were becoming increasingly desperate, and this latest stunt only reinforced his resolve to stand his ground. Instead of letting her actions intimidate him, Jonathan decided to use them as ammunition. He documented the incident thoroughly, snapping photos of the patrol car in his driveway and saving screenshots of the non-emergency number he called later that night to confirm the nature of the report. If things escalated further, he wanted evidence of Karen's behavior, but Karen wasn't done yet. Over the following weeks, she launched a full-scale campaign against Jonathan, determined to turn public opinion against him. She attended every HOA meeting, speaking passionately about the importance of enforcing rules consistently. She accused Jonathan of selfishness, claiming he cared more about showing off his pet project than respecting the community's standards. At one particularly heated session, she even suggested that allowing exceptions for historic vehicles would lead to chaos, with residents parking rusted-out junkers in their driveways under the guise of preservation. Her argument struck a chord, with some board members, though others seemed skeptical, especially after reviewing Jonathan's documentation. Outside of official meetings, Karen tried rallying neighbors to her cause. She knocked on doors, leaving flyers that framed the Mustang as a potential threat to property values. "Do we really want our neighborhood turning into a museum for old cars?" one flyer read. Another warned ominously, "Today it's a Mustang, tomorrow it could be a tractor." While a handful of residents expressed mild concern, most shrugged it off. Many had already seen the Mustang up close and admired its beauty. Some even admitted privately to Jonathan that they thought Karen was overreacting. Her attempts to sway public opinion ultimately backfired, making her appear more like a troublemaker than a concerned citizen. Despite her efforts, Jonathan remained calm and composed. Rather than retaliating directly, he focused on building support for his side of the argument. He invited curious neighbors to take a closer look at the Mustang, explaining its history and the painstaking process of restoring it. He shared stories about the craftsmanship that went into designing the 1967 Fastback and highlighted its cultural significance as a symbol of American automotive innovation. Slowly but surely, he began winning people over, not through confrontation but through education and charm. One neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, became a vocal advocate for Jonathan. A retired school teacher with a soft spot for nostalgia, she loved hearing about the Mustang's journey from a neglected shell to a gleaming masterpiece. "This car isn't just a vehicle," she told the HOA board during a subsequent meeting. "It's a piece of art. I think it adds character to our neighborhood, not detracts from it." Others echoed her sentiment, pointing out how the Mustang brought joy to kids who loved seeing it and sparked conversations among adults. As public opinion shifted, Karen grew increasingly isolated. Her relentless attacks on Jonathan started to wear thin, even among those who initially supported her. Board members began questioning whether her complaints were truly about maintaining standards or merely a personal vendetta. Tensions reached a boiling point when the HOA president suggested mediation as a way to resolve the conflict. Both parties reluctantly agreed, though Karen entered the process with unwavering confidence. She believed her position was unassailable, and that Jonathan would eventually crumble under pressure. The day of the mediation arrived, and both sides gathered in a conference room at the local library. A neutral mediator guided the discussion, encouraging each party to present their case calmly and respectfully. Jonathan spoke first, outlining the legal protections for historic vehicles and presenting his meticulously organized folder of evidence. He emphasized how the Mustang enhanced the community's appeal and argued that enforcing Rule 12B against such a unique car would set a dangerous precedent. His tone was measured but passionate, conveying both his love for the Mustang and his commitment to finding a fair solution. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she launched into a tirade, accusing Jonathan of arrogance and disregarding the rules. Her voice rose with every sentence, and she struggled to stay composed as the mediator gently reminded her to focus on facts rather than emotions. When asked to provide concrete evidence supporting her claims, Karen faltered. She had no documentation, proving the Mustang caused harm or disrupted the neighborhood. In fact, her arguments relied almost entirely on subjective opinions about aesthetics. The more she talked, the clearer it became that her stance lacked substance. By the end of the Yandi session, the mediator concluded that further discussion was needed. However, the dynamics of the conflict had shifted significantly. Karen's aggressive tactics and inability to back up her claims had alienated many of her former allies, while Jonathan's reasoned approach earned him widespread sympathy. For the first time, Karen found herself questioning whether she had taken things too far. But rather than stepping back, she doubled down, vowing to continue fighting until the Mustang was gone. Little did she realize, her persistence was about to cost her dearly, not just financially, but socially as well. The mediation session ended without a clear resolution, but the cracks in Karen's armor were beginning to show. What she had expected to be a decisive victory turned into an embarrassing spectacle that exposed her lack of preparation and her reliance on emotion over logic. For Jonathan, however, the meeting marked a turning point. The mediator's neutral presence forced both sides to present their arguments clearly, and it became evident who was better equipped to make their case. Jonathan's calm demeanor, backed by solid evidence and legal support, contrasted sharply with Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. As the session wrapped up, even some of Karen's former supporters began to distance themselves from her cause. Determined not to let the issue fizzle out quietly, Karen decided to escalate matters further. She filed yet another formal complaint with the HOA board, this time accusing Jonathan of harassment for allegedly parading his Mustang around the neighborhood to provoke her. This new accusation was met with raised eyebrows from board members who found it hard to take seriously. One member even joked during a closed-door discussion that if showing off a beautifully restored car constituted harassment, then half the community would need to be reprimanded for their holiday light displays. Karen's credibility continued to erode, but she refused to back down, convinced that persistence would eventually pay off. Meanwhile, Jonathan took a different approach. Rather than responding directly to Karen's accusations, he focused on gathering more support within the community. He organized a small gathering at his house, inviting neighbors to come see the Mustang up close. It wasn't just about showing off the car, it was about fostering connections and building goodwill. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, families trickled into his driveway, drawn by curiosity and word-of-mouth buzz. Kids marveled at the shiny chrome accents and begged to sit inside, while adults peppered Jonathan with questions about the restoration process. He happily obliged, sharing stories about tracking down rare parts and spending countless hours perfecting every detail. Mrs. Peterson, the retired schoolteacher who had already become one of Jonathan's staunchest defenders, brought homemade cookies to share with the crowd. "This car is a treasure," she declared proudly to anyone who would listen. "It reminds us of simpler times and brings a little magic to our neighborhood." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon others chimed in with similar sentiments. Even some neighbors who had initially been indifferent to the dispute warmed up to the idea of keeping the Mustang visible. They saw it less as a rule violation and more as a source of pride, a conversation starter that added character to Willow Creek Estates. As the weeks passed, public opinion shifted decisively in Jonathan's favor. The HOA board, sensing the changing tide, scheduled another meeting to revisit the issue. This time, attendance was higher than usual, with several residents eager to voice their opinions. When Karen stood up to speak, her tone was defensive and combative. She accused the board of favoritism and claimed that allowing exceptions for historic vehicles would undermine the integrity of the community. But her words fell flat. Instead of rallying support, she alienated even more people, including some who had previously remained neutral. Jonathan's attorney also attended the meeting, delivering a concise yet compelling presentation on behalf of his client. He cited state laws protecting historic vehicles, highlighted precedents set by other communities, and emphasized how enforcing Rule 12b against the Mustang could expose the HOA to potential legal challenges. His arguments were bolstered by letters of support from local automotive experts, historians, and even a few prominent residents who admired Jonathan's dedication to preserving classic cars. By the end of the session, it was clear that the momentum had swung firmly in Jonathan's direction, but Karen still had one card left to play, or so she thought. In a last-ditch effort to sway the board, she submitted a petition signed by a handful of neighbors urging the removal of the Mustang. However, upon closer inspection, it became apparent that many of the signatures were either duplicates or forged. Mrs. Peterson, who recognized handwriting samples from her days as a teacher, pointed out discrepancies during the meeting. The revelation sparked murmurs of disbelief among attendees, and Karen's face flushed red with embarrassment. When questioned by the board president, she stammered and tried to deflect blame, but the damage was done. Her credibility was shattered. The final blow came when the HOA board announced its decision. Rule 12b would be amended to include provisions for historic vehicles like Jonathan's Mustang. While the exact criteria were still being finalized, the ruling effectively allowed Jonathan to keep the car parked in his driveway without fear of penalties. The room erupted in applause, with many residents congratulating Jonathan on his perseverance. Karen, visibly humiliated, stormed out of the meeting before it concluded. Though the battle was officially over, the aftermath proved costly for Karen, not just financially, but socially as well. Filing multiple complaints and dragging the issue through mediation had incurred significant legal fees, which she was now responsible for paying. Worse still, her reputation in the community plummeted. Neighbors who once tolerated her nitpicking now avoided her altogether, tired of her constant drama. Some even began filing counter-complaints against her for past grievances, forcing the HOA to launch an investigation into her conduct. Rumors circulated that she might be removed from her position on the board entirely. For Jonathan, the victory felt sweet but bittersweet. He had no desire to humiliate Karen or see her punished. He simply wanted to protect his beloved Mustang. Still, he couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that justice had prevailed. The car wasn't just a possession anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, creativity, and the power of standing up for what you believe in. As he stood in his driveway later that evening, watching the sunset bathe the Mustang in golden light, Jonathan reflected on everything he had learned throughout the ordeal. He realized that sometimes the hardest battles yield the most rewarding victories. In the days that followed, life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after such a dramatic saga. Neighbors resumed their routines, chatting over fences and waving hello as they passed each other on morning walks. The Mustang remained parked proudly in Jonathan's driveway, drawing smiles from passers-by and sparking conversations among admirers. And while Karen kept a low profile, occasionally spotted tending to her garden or walking her dog, her influence in the community had diminished significantly. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt peaceful, and Jonathan knew he had played a part in restoring that harmony.